Hello and welcome. My name is Jennifer Gates, the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. Thank you for joining this webinar today on implementing a new methodology for historic resources surveys, a case study of SurveyLA. The format for today's webinar will include an hour-long presentation followed by time for questions and answers. At this time, I do want to point out a couple of items on your toolbar on the right hand of your screen. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please type it in the box, and I will either reply directly to you or hold the question until the end for the panelists to answer. Please also at this time, under the Audio tab, select if you are listening through the telephone or speakers. To hide or unhide this toolbar at any time, just click on the orange arrow. Today's presentation will be by Ken Bernstein, Janet Hansen, and Katie Horak. Ken Bernstein is the Principal Planner for the Policy Planning and Historic Resources Division of the Los Angeles Department of City Planning. In this capacity, he serves as manager of the city's Office of Historic Resources, where he directs Los Angeles's historic preservation policies. He serves as lead staff member for the city's Cultural Heritage Commission, oversees SurveyLA, a multi-year citywide survey of historic resources with significant support from the J. Paul Getty Trust, and is working to create a comprehensive historic preservation program for Los Angeles. He also oversees citywide policy planning, including the department's work on its general plan elements, housing and transportation planning, updates of the city's community plans, and the department's urban design studio. He previously served for 8 years as Director of Preservation Issues for the Los Angeles Conservancy, the largest local nonprofit historic preservation organization in the country, where he directed the Conservancy's public policy and advocacy activities. He served as Planning and Transportation Deputy to Los Angeles City Council member Laura Chick from 1993 to 1998, and worked for 3 years as editor of the Planning Report, a monthly publication on urban planning, housing, and transportation issues in Southern California. He has been an adjunct professor in the Urban Studies and Planning Department of California State University, Northridge, teaching a course on urban planning for the public sector, and has served as a board member for numerous civic organizations. He has a master's degree in public affairs and urban and regional planning from Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, and a bachelor's in political science from Yale University. Janet Hansen holds a master's degree in history and historic resources management from the University of California, Riverside. She has over 20 years professional experience in the field working in both the public and private sectors. Janet is currently employed as the Deputy Manager of the Los Angeles Office of Historic Resources, where she assists in the administration of the city's historic preservation program and manages SurveyLA, the multi-year citywide survey of historic resources. SurveyLA is a project of unprecedented size and scope and is garnering national attention for its cutting-edge approach to completing historic resources surveys. Prior to her work in Los Angeles, Janet served for 6 years as the Historic Preservation Officer for the City of Riverside, where she helped build one of the most highly regarded preservation programs in California. While managing her own cultural resources consulting firm, Janet completed a wide array of projects ranging from historic resources surveys to collections management to historical exhibition planning and design. Janet is a regular speaker and presenter at local, state, and national preservation conferences and workshops and has won numerous awards for her work in the field. She currently serves on the Board of Directors of the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions and Education Committee of the California Preservation Foundation. Katie Horak is an architectural historian and preservation planner at Architectural Resources Group in Pasadena. Katie obtained her Master of Historic Preservation degree from the University of Southern California, starting out in this very room during Historic Preservation Summer Course of 2003. Katie has more than 8 years' experience in historic resource management in both the public and private sectors. Before working for ARG, Katie worked for the City of New York Landmarks Preservation Commission, where she managed historic resource surveys and completed designation reports for potential New York landmarks. She has extensive historic resources survey experience, having led a wide range of survey projects on both coasts, for which she has managed large teams and utilized state-of-the-art field technology such as tablet PCs and GIS software. In the Los Angeles region, Katie has successfully managed numerous historic resources surveys ranging in size from fewer than 50 buildings to greater than 98,000. Thank you today to our presenters, and I will let them begin now.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for the introductions, and want to welcome everyone to this webinar. All of us, as part of the SurveyLA team, are very excited about this opportunity to use this webinar technology to raise awareness about new practices in historic resources surveys and to engage with some of our colleagues around the state, both in local governments and in the historic preservation community. So we're very pleased to be with all of you this afternoon. Wanted to begin, I will begin with an overview of some of the background of SurveyLA and our basic structure and approach to the overall project. Janet will then be next and be speaking more specifically about the SurveyLA methodology and how it differs from past historic resources surveys and how we're trying to move survey practice in a new direction. And then Katie will focus more specifically on the approach to the field surveys and talk about case study, one of our field surveys in the West Adams area of the city of Los Angeles. So I wanted to begin with an overview of what SurveyLA is and how it is structured. It is, of course, our citywide historic resources survey. It is the Los Angeles Historic Resources Survey project, and this came about as a result of several years of preparatory work by the Getty. We're very pleased to have the Getty as a home institution here in Los Angeles, and SurveyLA grew out of several years of work by the Getty Conservation Institute, which had paved the way for the project with a series of reports, an assessment report about 10 years ago, and then a series of white papers that culminated in a final survey report presented to the city in 2005. All of that resulted in a formal grant agreement between another arm of the Getty Foundation, and the City of Los Angeles. It was a grant agreement providing a $2.5 million matching grant to the city, subject to annual matches by the city, matching the Getty dollar for dollar, and meeting milestones each year of the project. That matching grant created the framework for SurveyLA, and indeed created the framework for the establishment of the city's first ever Office of Historic Resources that Janet and I now help oversee. So the project is managed by our office. We are part of the Department of City Planning. So as we'll talk about, we felt it was very important from the outset to link historic preservation and survey information into the city's planning process. Previously, the city's Cultural Heritage Commission, much of our preservation program had been in an arts department, the city's Cultural Affairs Department, and with this grant agreement and with the establishment of this office, survey information and the program was much more closely tied to urban planning, land use planning considerations. The survey is completed by professionals, by consultants who meet professional qualification standards in historic preservation. We'll be speaking more in a moment about the role of volunteers who have traditionally played a significant role in surveys here in California and around the country. But the Getty, in preparing the way for SurveyLA, and as well as our office, felt it was very important for the survey to have credibility within the Los Angeles community and among other historic preservation professionals, and it was important that the actual survey evaluations be made by professionals with the assistance of professional volunteers, with the assistance of volunteers in various capacities of the project. The Getty Grant Agreement structured SurveyLA as a two-phased project from the outset, with a multi-year initiation phase to start. It was recognized at the very beginning that it would take some preparatory work to structure a survey in a city as large and complex as Los Angeles. The components of the initiation phase included the citywide historic context statement, which Janet will be speaking about in greater detail in a few minutes, The public participation program, and I'll be outlining some of the components of that program, custom field database that we'll be showcasing for you this afternoon, and then pilot surveys to test the methodology of SurveyLA, as new and cutting edge as it is, to test how that would all work and work together before we roll this out citywide. We've completed the initiation phase now of SurveyLA, and we have moved into what the grant agreement called the implementation phase, and we are now in the midst of the first of 3 years of the actual field surveys in that implementation phase, which is now underway. I love to show this map in most of our presentations on SurveyLA because it really, in one image, illustrates the challenge before us. The sheer size of the city of Los Angeles, and I know many of you are from much smaller communities around California. Los Angeles is a city of 466 square miles and over 880,000 legal parcels, and this map shows the outline of the city with 8 of the largest cities in the country, including the island of Manhattan going down to our harbor region in the south, fitting with lots of room to spare within the boundaries of Los Angeles. And it's not only the size, it is the challenges that Los Angeles, of course, has among the greatest range of potential historic resources of any city in this country, a built environment that began in the mid to late, our resources from the mid to late 19th century, all the way up to our closing year for the survey. We cut off the survey with resources built in 1980, and during that time, tremendous range and complexity of resources and tremendous ethnic and demographic change and diversity during all of those eras. So it is an enormous challenge to encompass all of that history and build form through SurveyLA. The survey is intended to have multiple purposes, and being part of a city planning department, the primary focus has been, again, in integrating the survey into land use planning. In Los Angeles, we have a general plan with our land use element of the general plan broken into 35 geographic areas, or what we call community plan areas. Those 35 community plans essentially are our constitution, if you will, for local development. You see on this slide an image of the land use plan for our Hollywood community plan area. That community plan is currently being updated, and it is these community plans that define where and how we're going to grow as a city or evolve as a city. And we need to understand, as we undertake those updates to community plans, where our historic resources are, what they are, and whether we have opportunities or constraints as a result of those potential resources. In addition, adaptive reuse has been a significant focus of our activity here in Los Angeles. We have an adaptive reuse ordinance to ease the way for converting historic buildings to housing. We've had over 9,000 new housing units created in downtown, formerly commercial buildings. The survey will help identify additional adaptive reuse opportunities. Cultural tourism is a growing focus here, and in many cities, the interest in travelers to see and experience significant historic places. And we have not done a sufficient job of identifying and promoting those resources in Los Angeles, and the survey and this information will be a great benefit in promoting Los Angeles as a cultural tourism location. Most of you involved in historic preservation know that preservation is a significant economic development tool and can contribute to revitalization of our communities. One component that's fairly specific to Los Angeles is filming activity, where we have lost much of our historical advantage in Los Angeles as a film location. But one of our advantages has been that we have neighborhoods and places that can double as cities all over this country or internationally. And the survey can help location managers, directors, and others in the Hollywood community identify those locations. Of course, we all need to be prepared for the next earthquake or natural disaster, and in the aftermath of a disaster, often, almost inadvertently, historic resources are cleared away because we haven't known, identified, or appreciated those resources for what we have. The survey will provide that information in advance of the next disaster. And then there are the more intangible benefits in terms of identifying a sense of place or just providing basic knowledge about Los Angeles, a city that is only really beginning to be understood by the academic community and by more local researchers. So the survey has been, within our implementation phase, broken into phases over the next 3 years. And again, because we are linking this to planning, this will be completed by community plan area, and we will be getting to all 35 of those community plan areas over the next 3-year period. Within each year, we are breaking the surveys into multiple groups to ease the actual field work that's underway, and Janet will speak as well about some of the data management and preparation that goes into each of these surveys. So we'll have multiple groups, in many cases 3 groups, within each of the 3 years of the survey. Our public participation and public outreach program has been key to the success of this project, and it is really essential that we engage all segments of the Los Angeles community in this project. One of the goals from the very beginning has been to try to head off any misconceptions or opposition to the survey. Often members of the public have misconceptions about surveys, such as that any property that has been identified in a survey has automatically, therefore, been designated as a local landmark or a local historic district. Others have understandable property rights concerns, just want to better understand what it means to have a property included in the survey. We try to address those frequently asked questions from the very outset of all of our community meetings. But we want to do more than that, more than just engender acceptance. We want to foster actual engagement in the project and encourage public input from the very beginning of the project. We are also recruiting volunteers and interns through much of our outreach. And the focus of our outreach really has been in identifying potential resources of social and cultural significance. The philosophy of SurveyLA has been that it is community members themselves, in many cases, that know their communities best. And while we will have professional evaluations, we want to make certain that the values and interests of each community are reflected in our survey work. And we believe that the architectural historians that in most cases make up our professional consultant teams can readily identify the architectural wonders of any given community, but may not be aware of the places of deeper social and cultural meaning that are less obvious to the naked eye or someone new to a community in identifying potential resources. So in engaging these communities through SurveyLA, we're using multiple tools. One of them, naturally, is our website, which is SurveyLA.org, and we encourage you after the webinar to take a look at some of what we're doing on the website and find out more information about the project. We produced a video, a half-hour video with actually a shorter, about 10-minute version that we can show at the community meetings. That video was produced in conjunction with our local cable channel. It has been airing regularly on our local cable channel for about the last 3 years. We were also supported by the State Office of Historic Preservation through a certified local government grant, and that provided us with funding to dub copies, DVD copies of the video for dissemination to our neighborhood councils, other neighborhood organizations, and historical societies around the city, and to translate the video into Spanish. We have a volunteer speakers bureau, which is a fairly novel component of our outreach program. We realized that Janet and I basically are the staff, the professional staff within our planning department for SurveyLA. We are supplemented by some information technology staff, but the two of us did not have the time and resources to cover that 466 square mile geography and engage with all the community members that we need to be reaching in advance of the survey work. So the Speakers Bureau has been a trained group. We've now trained over 30 volunteers to represent us, be our emissaries, our ambassadors with community organizations throughout the city. And that has worked very well. We, I think, had some concerns at the outset whether volunteers would be able to accurately convey information about a complex topic such as this survey, but we have not had any negative experiences or reactions thus far to the Speakers Bureau. We have multilingual brochures and materials in a multilingual city such as Los Angeles. And our most recent innovation for the public participation program, we're just moving into this, is trying to enhance our social media presence. And over the coming months, we are going to be working with a organization called MindMixer. They are online at mindmixer.com. And over the next few months, we will be launching a new website that will be essentially a virtual town hall around SurveyLA, where we will be structuring public input, allowing people to suggest ideas for potential resources, and having more of an online conversation that we hope kind of goes viral or takes on a life of its own and increases the level of participation among community members and allows them to engage with each other virtually, in addition to the focus we've had on in-person public meetings. Finally, before we move into the methodology, just a word about how we've structured the public participation program. We've given it the umbrella name MyHistoricLA, so that people can tell us what is their historic LA, what are those places that are the hidden gems in their own community that they care about. And we have multiple ways to do that. One of them on the left is our hard copy historic resources identification form. We ask people to tell us just about one place that matters to them, that they think is significant in their own community. We have an online version of this same form, and then we supplemented that with a guide to public participation in SurveyLA, where we provide a menu of options in this guidebook, all of which is available on our website, for community members or community organizations to engage in this project. Everything from organizing a neighborhood walkabout, a group of neighbors getting together maybe on a Saturday morning to put the spotlight on particular neighborhoods or individual resources in their community, to doing project-specific research, pulling permits or other information from local libraries, to doing oral history interviews in a way that is place-based and specific to historic resources surveys. So all of that is contained in this MyHistoricLA guide, and it's a menu of tools for community organizations to engage. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Janet Hansen to move into the discussion of the SurveyLA field methodology.
Thank you, Ken, and welcome to the audience. Ken has already spoken in some detail about the public participation program. So what I want to do right now is introduce two other critical components of our SurveyLA methodology, and those are the citywide historic context statement and our field guide survey system. A context statement, of course, this audience knows is a narrative technical document that provides a framework for how the surveys are conducted, and it identifies themes, trends, and topics that represent the history and development of an area, and then links those to extant resources, or what we call property types. The innovative thing about our context statement is that we've developed a system to translate the components of the context statement into data fields, so it's used directly in the field for the survey work. And that brings us to the field guide survey system. It's a customized computerized GIS field application, which we call the FiGSS application. And it was developed in-house by our Systems and GIS division, also working with some consultants, both historic preservation consultants in terms of the design and content, but also programmers who helped actually write the code for the program itself. And it's designed for use in the field with a tablet PC. The FiGSS is the tool that allows us to use the context statement in the field. It has some other innovative features as well, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But I first wanted to introduce to you the context statement, the structure and development of it. Our context statement is citywide in scope, and from Ken's presentation, you already have an idea of the size and complexity of Los Angeles, the sheer complexity of the resources ranging from architecture to cultural history. So we spent a lot of time with consultants and in-house talking through how we wanted to format and design the context statement, and we had several outlines that we were working with before we came up with a system of 9 contexts. And within those contexts, we have over 200 themes and sub-themes. I'm going to show you how that works in a couple minutes. Again, it addresses resources dating from 1850 up to 1980, approximately 1850. The 1980 end date is obviously relatively recent, but we wanted to make sure, since this survey is taking many years, that the survey results were not obsolete as soon as we were done. So the context statement is not a completed document. It is still in process with a team of writers. We have over 20 people who have been working with us for a number of years on the context statement. And when I say in process, it's mostly working on the narrative description, significant statements of the context statement. The elements of the context statement that we needed to go into the field to do the surveys have been developed, and we'll show you how that works. We're using the multiple property documentation approach for our context statement that was developed by the National Park Service, and it was developed by them as a means of streamlining resources that were related by theme and nominating them to the National Register. So we're not doing direct nominations to the National Register as a result of SurveyLA, but this format is an extremely effective way of organizing a survey in a city the size of Los Angeles, although it works well even if you're doing a single neighborhood or a single theme. So for us, it greatly is streamlining the identification of our properties related by themes, and it provides, really importantly for us, a consistent framework for diverse teams out in the field evaluating. So everyone is using the same structure and the same standards to evaluate resources. And of course, having done this, it complies with best practices established both by the National Park Service and California Office of Historic Preservation, which has been one of our main objectives since the start of this survey work. So we have, again, 9 contexts for SurveyLA, and the bottom one is the other context, and that is a placeholder for resources that don't fit into any of the existing themes or sub-themes within these 9. So if a surveyor is out and identifies something that may be one of a kind, they can put it into this category, and then we look at that and do some further analysis on those resource types, and sometimes we develop additional themes. So just briefly, we have Spanish and Mexican colonial era settlement. This is the period before the city was incorporated. We have pre-consolidation communities of Los Angeles, and these were communities that were incorporated cities prior to being consolidated into Los Angeles, and these would include San Pedro, Venice, and Hollywood. Residential development and suburbanization. The numbers on the right are the periods of significance for these contexts. Commercial development, government and private institutional development, industrial development, the entertainment industry, which also includes the cultural history of the entertainment industry, then architecture and engineering, cultural landscapes. So as you can see, architecture is really just one of the contexts in this overall structure. And we also have included within this all of the cultural, ethnic, social history themes are within these 9 major contexts. A resource can be significant within more than one of these, by the way. So let's take this one step further. We had a theme for residential development, or a context for residential development and suburbanization, and just so you can see how this works is then we have 8 themes within that larger context. They relate to early residential development, streetcar, auto, and post-World War II suburbanization, developers in the development process, deed restriction and segregation, ethnic enclaves, and then a theme on multifamily residential development. And we do use, wherever we can for our context statement, any existing multiple property documentation that has been done. So in this particular context, we relied very heavily on the National Park Service national suburbanization context. It worked very well for us. So then breaking it down again one step further, within the theme for multifamily residential development, we now have some additional sub-themes, again with their own periods of significance. So as you can see, these range from garden apartments, apartment houses, bungalow courts, and also addresses residential districts. So what we have done with this context theme structure is taken the multiple property documentation approach and used the pieces in the multiple property documentation approach to develop a framework. So we have the context, and in some cases we have subcontext, themes, and sub-themes, and then property types. So this CTP, context theme property type, is what we call the information that's preloaded into the FiGSS application. For each one of those, we have a geographic area. This is the geographic areas in the city where the resources are likely to be found, of course a period of significance, and the area of significance, which are the National Register areas of significance relating to social history, could be military history, architecture, etc. And so then we would have the property type and subtypes. Usually there are both those. And then we have eligibility standards. And all of these are developed by the writers who are working on each of these context theme property type combinations. So they have extensive experience working with the property types and the themes. And these are called registration requirements in the National Park Service or the multiple property form, but we're using eligibility standards so there isn't any confusion with the public that we're registering or designating properties as a direct result of the survey. So the three pieces of this, the eligibility standards, essentially they set up the strength of the association of a resource to the context. So when the surveyors are in the field, they're going to be looking at these elements of the eligibility standards and apply them to the resource so that they can determine whether or not these are the best examples of a property type in the field. So they're looking at associative qualities, which may be the case for something that is more ethnic cultural significance, and then character defining, or those physical features that may be important for architecture or a particular property type. And then those aspects of integrity that are really essential to conveying the significance of that resource under the eligibility standards. For SurveyLA, we are evaluating properties for the National Register, the California Register, and city criteria, which here are historic cultural monuments and historic preservation overlay zones, or HPOZs. We're doing that so that the survey results are useful for any type of CEQA review or review under Section 106. And then we are assigning California Historical Resource Status Codes to all evaluated resources. So on the screen, what you see now is a template that we have developed as part of the resource guide. Because we had a lot of different people working on the context statement, we decided to prepare a resource guide and actually conducted training. So this template is part of the resource guide, and it takes the pieces of the CTP combination that we just went over and puts them into a template format, which is then taken and put directly into the field application. So you can see it has the integrity aspects, your eligibility standards, character defining features, integrity considerations, and we also include in here any designated and known examples. So if we take this one step further, this is that template filled out for the context architecture and engineering, the subcontext LA modernism, and then the theme is related responses to modernism, and then the Art Deco. So we have a narrative summary statement of significance, and all of the elements that would be preloaded into the FiGS application. Now, there is a larger narrative that is associated with all of these CTP combinations. So this is not the final product, and that was when I was discussing previously that we are still working on the narratives for these combinations. And then this is the second page where you can see a little bit more clearly the character-defining features. All of these, rather than being written in a narrative format, which they would be for the National Register, are put into bullet points. And Katie's going to demonstrate exactly how that works in the field in just a couple of minutes. So a field methodology in the FiGS, what makes our methodology different than a traditional survey? One of the things we are doing is focusing on recording resources that are significant. So surveyors will be either driving or walking up every street in Los Angeles, but they are not recording every single resource, and they're not doing research on every single resource. They are basing their evaluations on some pre-field research and also on the preloaded data, which some of it Ken talked about in relation to the public participation program. But we're trying to give surveyors as much information as we can before they start recording. So because the FiGS is GIS-based, all of these appear as shaded layers on the FiGS system. So surveyors go out, they'll have a map of their area in front of them, but on that, the CTP or context-themed property types are loaded. The State Historic Resources Inventory for Los Angeles is loaded into it. Any previous surveys that we had in a large electronic format, we have preloaded into the FiGS, as well as assessor data such as construction dates, and then again the public participation data. So if we've received information from the public, it is put into a table, and that table is then loaded into the FiGS application, and that data will be tied to specific addresses. So if a surveyor is standing in front of or walking up and down the street and nothing appears visually interesting to them, if a property is shaded, then they would know to click on that, and they would be able to read right in the field the information that we've collected on that property. The FiGS records 4 basic property types, individual resources, which are those generally associated with parcels and addresses, such as houses or a commercial building. And then we have historic districts, which could be a commercial area, could be an entire neighborhood, but it might also include a large garden apartment complex or a campus. Planning districts are those that do not meet eligibility requirements, but we have flagged them for consideration in local planning. So a planning district would not be subject to review under CEQA, but since we're trying to closely tie this to the planning process, we have used that status code of 6L that the Office of Historic Preservation has developed to flag areas that we think have a consistent character in terms of maybe setbacks and heights and street trees, sidewalks, but on a building-by-building basis, it does not retain sufficient integrity to meet the eligibility requirements for a district. And then non-parcel resources are generally those that are not associated with an address or an assessor parcel number, and that could be a landscape median or street trees, sometimes signs, bridges, those types of resources. We're not writing narrative architectural descriptions for SurveyLA. We've developed a system that will generate bullet point architectural descriptions automatically from the data. And then surveyors are not filling out DPR forms. So importantly, we've developed a process where the consultants literally give our systems GIS staff the data and the photographs, and then we generate all DPR forms and other reports that we have designed specifically for the public that are a little bit more interesting and friendly to read. So surveyors are not spending their time and money writing descriptions and populating DPR forms. They are writing a report, a final report, but we have a streamlined process for that as well and a consistent format for it. So this is the map Ken showed you previously, the city of Los Angeles, and the areas that are shaded in green are those that we are surveying in year 1. Group 1 and 2 are the surveys are complete. Group 3 should be completed maybe the beginning of next year. And then after the surveys are done, there is some data cleanup and reports to prepare. But the numbers in the right are parcels in each area, and you can see they range from approximately 3,000 all the way up to over 50,000. So when the surveys are being completed, we have anywhere from 1 to maybe 4 laptops assigned to each area. This is a flow chart that illustrates the management of the surveys in the field. And we already talked about the Office of Historic Resources. And again, there's not a huge team of people working on this. It's Ken and I. But we do rely very heavily on our Systems and GIS division, who not only manage the FiGSS application, but they're the ones that prepare all of the preload data that you see. They prepare all the maps for the surveys. They do the downloading of the results. They prepare all of the reports. So it's data management for this is a huge task. But even at that, there are only 3 people in our systems and GIS. And then we have volunteers and interns in our office who work on the project. We generally have from 1 to 3 part-time interns at a time. And then from that, we go down to the lead field survey consultant. We do have a pre-qualified list of consultants that we work from, and we have one of those firms would be the lead, and they consult to, I think for year 1, they've generally had 3 to 4 sub-consultants working with them as well, and then each of those teams makes good use of interns, and these are generally recent graduates from local university programs. Luckily for them, they're paid internships. So I'm going to turn this over to Katie, and she's going to demonstrate a little bit more clearly some of the issues that we've just talked about.
Thank you so much, Janet, and thanks to everybody in the audience. I hope you're all staying with us. I know this is a lot of information to cover, and we can't see you, but hopefully you're following along. So what I wanted to talk about in my section of this presentation is the reconnaissance that we do for the field surveys, and then I'll actually give you a little bit of a test drive with the FiGSS database, and then I'll end with giving a brief summary of our findings in the West Adams, Baldwin Hills, Leimert Park community plan area, which is we'll be able to give you just a brief summary of what we found and how we use the context statement in the field. So as Janet mentioned, the community plan areas range in size from about 3,000 to 50,000 properties. And although the FiGSS methodology is laid out for us very clearly how we actually record things in the field, how we cover that ground is really up to the consultant team. And we were fortunate to work on one of the pilot surveys in Boyle Heights, and that community plan area was around 9,000 properties, and that was a survey of unprecedented size for us, for our firm. So it took a little while for us to decide how are we going to cover all of that ground and make sure we're looking at every single resource. Even though we're only recording those that are significant, we need to make sure to drive every single street.
So we came up with a methodology, a reconnaissance methodology, that seems to work really well, that we complete before we even go into the field with the FiGS database. So as a case study, I'll use the West Adams, Baldwin Hills, Leimert CPA, and I'll just call it West Adams CPA just for the sake of time. And this is an area of approximately 33,000 properties to be surveyed. So that's 33,000 properties that were constructed before 1980. So what we do in the reconnaissance phase is take this giant survey area and then we break it down into smaller, more manageable survey areas based on general neighborhood boundaries. So this really breaks this gigantic area into more palatable survey areas. And the next thing that we do is we make maps that have these smaller areas onto a large 11 by 17 actual paper map, and we're able to then make chronology maps with the GIS shapefiles that are provided by the city in the FiGS. And this way we're able to really visually see the patterns of development within our survey areas. So as you can see, we can, and I'm actually going to use this little red dot, which hopefully I can point out things to you. You can really see these concentrations of resources that were built in chronological periods of time. So this is broken down into 10-year periods. And we're really able to see these neighborhoods, and these are how we're able to, before we even go into the field, see how an area developed, and oftentimes end up being potential historic districts or historic preservation overlay zones. So then we go into the field. Once we've done a little bit of pre-field research and looked at our chronology maps, we go into the field with these blank maps, and we're able to mark each street as we drive down. And so we're actually, instead of going out into the field with a database, we're going out with these paper maps and sort of doing it what we call the old-fashioned way, and really marking up these blank maps and making notes about what we feel we should come back and record because they appear to be significant. So as you can see, the yellow lines here, this is just a field map that we've scanned and put into this presentation. The yellow lines are streets that we've already driven down, so we need to go back down those streets, and then we would mark things in orange that appear to be significant, so things that we want to come back and record with the FiGS. And then this blue area here is a potential historic district that we'd like to come back and record in the database. So there are several benefits that we found to doing the reconnaissance this way, even though it ends up being quite a bit of time before actually going out with the FiGS. It really streamlines the process so much, and there are a few reasons why it does that. First of all, we're able to see the entire survey area in a relatively short period of time, which is great for comparative analysis. So when you're going into these areas, in a city this big, certainly do a lot of work in Los Angeles, but we don't know all of these neighborhoods. We certainly haven't driven every street before this time, so it really helps to see everything all at once. We can do a lot of comparative analysis of what we're seeing. So we might have assumed that a architectural style or a resource type might be sort of rare in an area, but if you're driving the entire thing at once, you really get a good idea of what is rare and what isn't. Also, we're able to move through the area relatively quickly and without losing momentum, whereas if we went out with a FiGS database, you stop, you look at the database, and you look at all of the data that's within it, and then you sort of lose your momentum. So this allows us to go at a relatively quick pace and then come back later with the FiGS and do more of it's a much more specific recordation process, just sort of a treasure hunt going from resource to resource that's already been identified. And another benefit to doing this way is because we have these very large consultant teams where we might have 3 or 4 consultants, different consulting firms working on a single team, we'll have one representative from each firm in the car for all of the reconnaissance, which really ensures consistency of our findings. So once we've finished all of the reconnaissance and we have our marked up maps, we go back to the office and we make a little table that has the street, just very basic information like street address, the year constructed, the property type, and then the context theme under which it should be recorded, and then the neighborhood that it's in, and then some notes, just saying what exactly the resource is. And this is so that when we send out our teams, we have 2 or 3 teams going out at any given time into the neighborhood. They know exactly what they're looking for, and they know which context theme and property type to record it under. So once we're done with the reconnaissance, then we actually go out into the field with the FiGS. So this is where I'm going to actually give you a little bit of a test drive and show you what it's like to go into the field with this database. So the first screen, what you're seeing now is the first screen that we see when we're in the field with the application. So
and I'm going to use this pointer again as if I'm using the stylus with the tablet PC. So this information to the left, this is what we call the table of contents, and this is all of the preloaded information that's in the FiGS. So I'm not sure how you can see this on your screens, but we have things like street name, address number, and then other things like previous survey information. If these areas have been surveyed in the past and they have information about them, they're highlighted in blue, as you can see here. And then anything that's already designated, we obviously don't want to spend our time surveying things that are already designated, so those are also highlighted on the screen so we can just skip them. But then also there's this OHR research layer, which is the layer in green. So anyone who has submitted any information to the Office of Historic Resources about properties that are significant to them in their neighborhood, these properties that might have cultural significance, that information is preloaded into the FiGS, and it's shaded in green so that when we approach a property like this, we can click on that property and see what information exists, has been preloaded already for that resource. So the first thing that we would do is then, if we're recording an individual resource, is just click onto, just with the stylus, click onto the rooftop of the property that we want to record. And then the first screen that pops up is this just sort of a general information screen where we can see the preloaded information down here. And then there's the address of the resource here. So we're just confirming right away that the resource we're looking at in the field matches up with the address that's on the screen. And the first thing that we do is take a photograph, and we do that in the field with the FiGS and instantaneously upload it into the database so that it's connected actually to the parcel that we're recording. So in this case, this is an old Vandy Camps retail building, an old commercial building on South Figueroa Street in Los Angeles, and you can sort of see the old Vandy Camps windmill tower here, and the storefront is here. And down here, this is the preloaded information. So in this case, the resource it was in the Gebhardt and Winter Guide to Los Angeles, and so that information has been preloaded into the database. And it was also surveyed in 1995, and that information is also in the database to help guide us in our survey. So once we've entered the photograph and made sure that the address is correct, we move on to the next screen, which has all the general information. And a lot of this is preloaded. So the year built is already preloaded into the FiGS. It's a part of the assessor's data. And so we see the year built on the screen, and then that preloaded data is still at the bottom. So we can double-click on any of this data to populate things like the resource name, or if the architect or builder is preloaded, we can enter that information into the FiGS. And then we select the property type and the resource attribute code. The next screen is the architectural details screen. This is where we record the style of the building, and then we also record whether or not there are any significant alterations that have been made. So one of the really great things about FiGS is that almost everything has a drop-down menu, so we're very rarely actually having to type anything, actual free text in the field, which can be somewhat cumbersome with a tablet. So whenever there's a little dot like this, or a little square box, we can just click on this, and there's a drop-down list that we can just select options from. So the architectural style, we selected Art Deco for this property, and then we were able to select some of the significant alterations that we noted in the field. So in this case, the storefront had been altered, and then we also noted that the windmill blades had been removed from the tower, and obviously that's a very specific alteration that probably wasn't in the drop-down list, but we were able to actually modify that list and free text over one of the other items in the list, just in case there's something very specific that we want to note that isn't already in the list. So at this point, this is when we do the architectural description. So you click on the Start Description button, and it takes us to the architectural description tabs. And this is, as Janet mentioned earlier, we're not writing narrative architectural descriptions for any of these resources, which it presents just a tremendous time savings for us. As you all know, writing an architectural description in narrative format can take a long time and can be sort of cumbersome, whereas in the field we're just selecting basically attributes and that come in these little drop-down menus, and these will then populate a bullet point architectural description. So there are a number of tabs, and just the general information such as the plan, the construction, cladding, roof type, roof material, and then the entrance information, fenestration information, and things like that. And we just select, just using the stylus, just click on the applicable attributes, and then it populates these little, all of the fields. And then if there's something that just isn't really, if you're just not able to describe something using the drop-down menus, maybe it's a non-parcel resource, so it might be a tree or a bridge or something like that that just doesn't have, it's just not easily describable using the drop-down menus. There is the opportunity to use a free text box to describe something. So in this case, say we were recording an air raid siren, of which we have several in Los Angeles, we're able to free text the description into the box that way. So once we've entered all of the general architectural information, we then we move on to the evaluation screens. So this is where we choose the context, theme, and property type, or the CTPs, under which we'd like to record the resource, or which we have found it to be significant in the field. So in this case, we start by evaluating this property under the context of architecture and engineering. And because there are so many, as Janet mentioned, there are, I think, about 200 CTP combinations, once you start with a context, each subsequent field then self-selects based on your previous choice. So you're not looking at hundreds of options every single time. Once you select your context, only the subcontexts that apply will pop up in the next screen. So in this case, we use the Art Deco Sun theme to evaluate this little Vandy Camps building. And then the next screen has the eligibility standards and the character-defining or associative features. So this is when we decide whether or not what we are recording really does meet the eligibility standards. And these have all been preloaded based on the person who wrote the context statement. They've entered this information into the FiGS. So the eligibility standards for Art Deco basically retains the essential character-defining features of the Art Deco style, was constructed during the period of significance, and exhibits quality of design through distinctive features. Now, because this property meets those eligibility standards, we select them all and then move on to the character-defining features. The next screen then is the integrity screen, where we then evaluate the integrity of the resource. And down at the bottom, you can see all 7 aspects of integrity are represented here, and we're able to select which ones apply, which is the next step in the evaluation process. And then the last screen that we get to is where we actually make our recommendation for whether or not the resource is eligible. So whether it's under the local level, the state level, or under the federal level, we then enter the applicable status code. So in this case, we said it was eligible under all 3 designation programs. And as a rare example of an Art Deco Vandy Camps retail building, we said it was one of very few remaining in the city, and it exhibits high quality of design through its distinctive features. So we don't have a lot of space here to write a very flowery reason for significance, and that's really by design, because you don't want to spend a lot of time in the field writing a lengthy reason statement. It's very concise and gets right to the point. So at this point, if you want to record the resource under another CTP, in this case we would likely do that under commercial development as a Vandy Camps building. You can then add CTP here at the bottom and record under another CTP combination. But for the interest of time, I will not go through that process again because we'd like to show you another way that, or we'd like to show you the way that we evaluate historic districts in the field. Before we move on, I just want to show you what happens once you're done with a individual evaluation. This little push pin pops up on the rooftop of the building that you've evaluated, which is how you know that you finished your evaluation and you can move on to your next resource. So the Historic District Resource Evaluation Tool is one of the things about FiGS that is just so time-saving and efficient, because we're able to just draw a boundary around the area that we'd like to evaluate, and it captures all of the parcels within that boundary. So as you can see here, this is the Vermont Knolls Historic District, which is a historic district of approximately, I think, 600 to 700 properties, and we're able to draw the boundary with the FiGS around this tract, and then it captures all of those resources within that boundary. And in the evaluation process is very similar as you do for an individual resource. Instead, we're doing it for this collection of resources instead. So this is how it looks when you start. And then the first screen that pops up is the district detail screen. So instead of an individual resource, we have the district resource screen. So we enter the district name, what we'd like to call it, if it has a historic name, and then very brief significance and description narrative statements. And this is essentially what we would write if we're filling out the district record of a DPR form set. So once we fill out the basic information, we then click on this Contributors button, and we're able to enter information for every single building within that historic district. So and we're just entering very basic information about each building rather than going into a lengthy evaluation process for each one, because really we're just evaluating the district. We just want to record every parcel that's within a district boundary. So in this case, you'll see that we've taken a photograph and entered it in, and then we note whether or not it's a contributor or a non-contributor, and then we just move on to the next resource. So in the end, you're able to see how your district has shaped up. So as you can see here, this is the Vermont Knolls Historic District once we're done with all of the field work, and all of the green check marks are contributors, and all of the red X's are non-contributors, and then the blue question marks are those properties that we'd like a little bit more research before we can make an evaluation of contributor or non-contributor status. So the FiGS updates itself in real time. So as you're going through and entering all of your contributors and non-contributors, you can really get a sense of how your district is shaping up, whether or not you can see if it's very heavily on the contributor side. If you have too many non-contributors, you may decide to just move on because the historic district just isn't eligible. So the next resource type that we're evaluating in the field is the non-parcel resource. And sometimes we encounter things we want to record that just they're not associated with a parcel, or they're not a building. And so in this case, it might be a median, as you can see here in the screen that goes along 98th Street here. It could be a median or a bridge or something like that. So in this case, we just draw a boundary around the resource that we want to record, and the FiGS then shades it such as you see here, and then the evaluation screen pops up. And we go through the same process that we go through for an individual resource. It's just that it's for a non-parcel resource. So the next, what I wanted to do next is give you a little, just a brief summary of our findings in the West Adams, Baldwin Hills, and Leimert CPA. And as you can see here, I just wanted to put this giant map of Los Angeles so you could really see where the CPA is in the context of LA. It's sort of right smack dab in the middle. Our downtown is here and stretches down to the harbor area. This is the San Fernando Valley. And West Adams, Baldwin Hills, and Leimert is sort of right in the middle and includes some of Los Angeles' older neighborhoods. A lot of them were developed due to streetcar lines which stretched sort of down major corridors and across major corridors in this area, which allowed it to be developed with residential and commercial development in the late 19th century and early 19th century. And as I mentioned before, this is a survey area of approximately 33,000 parcels. So one thing that we were surprised by when we did our survey is the amount of Spanish colonial revival neighborhoods we found in this area. Since it's an area that was relatively early and close to the city center, we did anticipate finding a lot of neighborhoods of craftsman bungalows and sort of turn-of-the-century neighborhoods, but we were really surprised by how many Spanish colonial revival neighborhoods we found from the 1930s and even into the early 1940s. And we really started to notice that they all looked exactly the same. We thought this has got to be the work of a single developer or builder. And sure enough, after doing a little research, we found that these neighborhoods were almost always developed by a builder-developer named L. Wayne Steinkamp, who is someone who is very little known, but had a major impact on the built environment of Los Angeles. And we found just a number of really wonderful intact neighborhoods that had been developed by this person who, before the survey, was sort of unknown to us. So it's one of the great finds of SurveyLA. And then something else that we found quite a few of in Baldwin Hills were garden apartment complexes. And I'm not sure if you've heard of Baldwin Hills Village or the Village Green. That's located in Baldwin Hills and is already a National Historic Landmark. But there are a number of other garden apartment complexes adjacent or nearby Baldwin Hills Village which have not been designated. And these are very significant for their use of garden city planning principles such as super block site planning, low density multifamily residential development, lots of expansive common green spaces for the communities to use. So we recorded a number of these as eligible for designation. And we also found a lot of streetcar commercial and residential development in these areas. As I mentioned before, this CPA was largely developed because of its adjacency to streetcar lines. And commercial development related to streetcar corridors really has vanished in Los Angeles. At one time, we had a lot of these wonderful streetcar commercial districts, and they've really disappeared because obviously commercial districts are the first to be redeveloped. And we were really surprised by the fact that we found some really wonderful concentrations of streetcar development, commercial development, which we did identify as eligible for designation, which is what you're seeing here. So what I wanted to do finally is present a few of our historic district findings and then tell you which context we record them under, which will sort of help you understand how we use the context statement in the field. And one thing about West Adams, Baldwin Hills, Leimert is it's a very diverse part of the city of Los Angeles and has been home to a number of ethnic groups throughout its history. And there's South Crenshaw was home to the Japanese American community after World War II, after they returned from internment, whereas before the war, they were really centered in Little Tokyo and parts of South Los Angeles. When they returned after the war, they settled in South Crenshaw and made a really very vibrant community of residential buildings and commercial buildings and institutional buildings. It was really the cultural center of the Japanese American community in Los Angeles after the war. And there's a district that we call the Crenshaw-Seinon Historic District. Seinon refers to the South Los Angeles Japanese American community that really conveys its significance for its association with this community. So it's a district of single-family, multifamily, and commercial buildings, and it's very intact. It had a 95% contribution and a period of significance of 1945 to 1965. And one thing that really makes this area special is that it has not only design elements that link it to the Japanese American community, but also these wonderful landscaping elements that you can see. And we recorded this under multiple CTPs, first residential development and suburbanization context under the theme of ethnic enclaves. And we're also able to record it under the cultural landscapes context under the theme of Japanese-style gardens for its, so that we were able to really call out its significance for having these really wonderful Japanese-inspired gardens. Another part of this CPA that we recorded as a potential historic district is the Leimert Park Historic District, which is a gigantic historic district of about 1,200 single-family and multifamily residences. It's a very significant planned community in Los Angeles dating from approximately the late 1920s to about 1945. And as you can see, just a really large area, not only with wonderful buildings, but also with streetscape features such as landscaping that date to the period of significance. And this is a true testament to the efficiency of FiGS because this is, like I said, such a huge district, and we're able to record all 1,200 resources or parcels within just a couple of weeks in the field. So for Leimert Park, we used the residential development context and the streetcar suburbanization theme because this was an area that developed specifically for its adjacency to streetcars. In fact, it had several streetcar lanes that ran right through the neighborhood. And we were also able to record it under the architectural and engineering context as a period revival neighborhood. It has a really wonderful concentration of Spanish colonial revival and some French revival buildings within the boundaries. And then also in Baldwin Hills, we found a district of post-war multifamily buildings. So these sort of donut-shaped courtyard buildings, all in this giant concentration. About 450 of them developed within just a few years of each other. The period of significance just spans about 8 years, 1954 to 1962. So it was just a major building campaign and a very significant concentration of this property type, whereas in the rest of LA, they're typically sort of scattered here and there. But this is a very large and very rare concentration of this property type. And here are just a few examples of these apartment buildings you can see in the bottom. And we recorded this under residential development and suburbanization under the multifamily residential theme as a very significant concentration of this property type. And then an example of a non-parcel resource, I think I mentioned before, the air raid sirens. Los Angeles has a pretty large collection of air raid sirens dating to the Cold War and World War II eras. And they've just kind of disappear into the landscape, but once you start looking for them, they kind of here everywhere. So we record these using the non-parcel tool, and there is a context theme property type combination specifically for them under the context of public and private institutional development. The theme is air raid sirens and civil defense. You can see an example of one there on the right. And then finally, mentioned before, were the planning districts. So these are districts that are not eligible either because they perhaps don't retain sufficient integrity for designation. However, they retain a sense of place or consistency in massing and scale that really makes them notable. So even though they're not eligible for designation, they may merit special considering in the planning process. So we identified this is another one of these really wonderful Spanish colonial revival neighborhoods developed by Steinkamp. However, each of the individual buildings had been altered, typically because they'd been restuccoed with some heavy textured stucco, and a lot of the roofing material had been removed. A lot of the windows had been removed. So because each individual building had been altered, the district did not appear to be eligible. But we still wanted to call it out as being a concentration of Spanish colonial revival buildings and having this very consistent scale and massing and street trees. It still gives it a distinct sense of place, but it's just not eligible because of compromised integrity. So that wraps up my component of the presentation. I want to pass it back to Ken, who will talk about the peer review process.
Thanks, Katie. So just to conclude our presentation, we wanted to end with what happens after the surveys are conducted, after the field surveys are completed. First of all, as Katie mentioned, we have multiple survey teams working on each of the field surveys, and in part, there's a great deal of internal peer review that takes place, multiple firms with different perspectives and experiences reviewing each other's work. But the grant agreement with the Getty also established a more formal review process, a review committee that was meant to be included with professionals in the field of historic preservation, history, and architectural history. We've included in that peer review committee representation from the State Office of Historic Preservation, so that OHP is involved with this process and the review of the findings. Those peer review meetings are facilitated by the Office of Historic Resources, and we have one of the consultants actually helping us lead that process and arrange for the meetings and the follow-up to those review meetings. The findings are being reviewed plan area by plan area, much in the way the survey is being conducted, and it's an internal review process, our staff and the peer review committee. We will, at the conclusion of that process, be releasing the results publicly, and there will be public meetings to share the findings and to validate them publicly before they are ultimately included in our GIS system and on our website and made official and final. So with that, wanted to conclude our presentation. Thank you for your attention. We'll leave this final slide up on the screen. It includes our contact information, Janet as our main contact, and then our multiple websites, our Facebook and Twitter feeds, as well as our blog at surveyla.wordpress.com, which kind of has chronicled some of the field survey work from more of a first-person perspective along the way. So we look forward to the question and answers and interaction. And again, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We are starting to get some questions. Don't forget on the right side. Hello. There we go. On the right side of your screen, you will see a question box, and if you just type in your question there, I will ask them of our panel today. So to begin, there is some interest in the FiGSS technology and software, and some individuals are interested if that will be available to other cities, the Office of Historic Preservation, the Department of the Interior, and is there a cost associated with this software?
Well, that's a great question. It's something we've been grappling with. We've had a great deal of interest from other cities, some here in California and some large cities from around the country. We are exploring options to make that available. Obviously, we have made, as a city of Los Angeles, working with the Getty, a significant investment in this system. And we are looking into options for potential sale or licensing of the system, it would not be at an exorbitant cost because we recognize that other local governments are at least as constrained as we are. But we are currently exploring some of those options and not kind of finalized that exploration. But for the time being, if there are other local governments or other private entities that are interested in the system, please do get in touch with Janet at the contact information that's on the screen, and we hope to be able to follow up with you with more specific information before too long.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about opportunities for consultants that want to get involved in this survey, either as a lead or a sub. Is there a process or a schedule for their involvement?
Sure. As I think Janet mentioned, that we have a kind of a stable currently of on-call consultants. We have, at this point, I believe, 7 firms that are already under contract to the City of Los Angeles to do survey work and other historic preservation consulting work for SurveyLA. Those firms can already subcontract to any other firm, and we've had some firms that are not pre-qualified or are directly under contract to us that have been part of SurveyLA teams. So for that, any firm can certainly get in touch with the firms that are already under contract. In the next couple of years, we will be putting out a new request for proposals for historic preservation consulting firms and reopening the list toward the latter part of this project, and again, pre-qualifying another set of firms to conduct this work and other historic preservation consulting work for the city.
Okay. Next question is, in regards to your designation process for your historic buildings, does LA have a policy of not designating the resource when a property owner objects?
I'll take that one as well. We do not. Los Angeles does not have an owner consent requirement in its cultural heritage ordinance. Having said that, obviously it is more politically challenging to have a designation approved when there is a strong objection from a property owner, but we as a professional staff for the Office of Historic Resources try to keep our Cultural Heritage Commission and our City Council focused on the designation criteria as opposed to the motivations of an applicant or any opponent. And I would say that for historic districts, what we call in Los Angeles our Historic Preservation Overlay Zones, or HPOZs, that requires approval by the City Council, and I think the political reality is that no City Council representative of a local area is going to support HPOZ designation if a majority or even a significant minority of property owners strongly object. So there's not an owner consent requirement in our HPOZ ordinance, but certainly a political reality that if there's widespread opposition, historic districts are very unlikely to be passed.
The next question is in regards to the status codes. Can you explain a little bit more about the different status codes that will be used through this final survey for rating properties?
Yeah, as we mentioned in the presentation, we are using the California Historical Resource Status Codes developed by the Office of Historic Preservation. However, early on in the project, we did some modification, or maybe expansion is the better term, of some of those codes to relate specifically to SurveyLA. And we worked with Marie Nelson at the Office of Historic Preservation when doing that, so we can make sure that we were consistent with the thinking that was developed for those resource codes. So, for example, the status code of 7R, which is a reconnaissance survey, we've put a Q on the end of that so that we know that when you see the 7RQ, it has a little bit of a different meaning for SurveyLA, and we want to be able to distinguish those in a list from a 7RQ that was done as another survey. So we're using that, for example, we talked about going up and down, driving or walking every street in Los Angeles, and then the surveyors record what they think is significant. But at the end of the survey process, they will provide every other property that wasn't recorded gets a 7 RQ. So we're not giving 6Z status codes to properties, which we didn't think was appropriate for a survey of this type because we're not doing property-specific research on every single resource. So it's a way of realizing that generally they know from looking at the buildings and doing visual inspections, maybe some social, cultural, historical significance that we didn't know about at the time that surveys were being done. But generally, we're assigning, the 3S status code, a 3CS for the California Register, and then 5S3s for individual resources. And then when resources locally or even at the national California, those status codes would change if they actually ended up being designated. But the surveyors are generally sticking with those status codes that are designed for surveyors to assign to properties when they're in the field. We have preloaded some other status codes so that the database is useful for doing Section 106 reviews. So we have a 6Y. We do have a 6Z. But for our purposes, we don't use it extensively, but we realize that there are other uses of the survey of the FIGS beyond just SurveyLA, so we wanted to be able to have it be useful for all different types of surveys. But we're sticking with the status codes developed by the state with some modifications.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions from the audience today? Okay, not seeing. All right, well, I wanted to thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. Later today, you'll receive an email. Oh, there's one more. How is this integrated into the planning process?
Okay, I'll take that one. I had a slide up earlier showing the multiple ways that we anticipated this would be integrated into the planning process, but I think the primary ways, first of all, are to guide our future community plan updates, that the knowledge of where our historic resources are, what they are, look at plan changes, particularly those that might affect zoning, what we often call upzoning of properties, where we are looking at increased density opportunities. In Los Angeles, we are building out a rail network around the city. Los Angeles had a well-established rail network in the early part of the 20th century, streetcar system. We lost that in the post-war era. We're now in many ways trying to recreate that. And as we do, we are trying to focus much of our future growth around the transit investments that are being made around the city. As we look at those, where those investments are going, and at land use, take advantage of those opportunities to encourage people to get out of their cars and take advantage of the transit system, we really need to understand where our historic resources are. It just so happens that there is some overlap in many parts of the city. We are looking at increased density in some of the more established areas of the city. Some of the areas that were built in the late 19th century or early 20th century is where some of those transit investments are going in neighborhoods in downtown, east of downtown, in Boyle Heights, some of the South LA communities. So this information is going to be really critical in the planning process as we look at potential impact, and then some of the opportunities that I mentioned earlier in terms of economic development and cultural tourism and so forth. Another area, of course, in the planning process is that our department has responsibility for environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act. And all too often, in the absence of survey information, these issues of potential historic resources only get raised in the CEQA process at the 11th hour, that in the context of a project that's subject to CEQA review, a community organization may raise concern about the loss or adverse impacts to a significant historic resource. The survey will be providing much more upfront information to guide CEQA review here in our department. When our department is a lead agency, consultants and applicants that are involved in that process, so they have the information up front that they'll need in the CEQA review process to take account of potential impacts to historic resources that they've already been identified rather than having that kind of 11th hour surprise, which is a difficult way to do historic preservation and not such a great way to comply with California Environmental Quality Act responsibilities. Okay.
Did we lose them?
Yeah, we did lose them. What happened?
She must have hit. Oh, wow. Oh, no. She must have
When
hit
did I?
close to end or something. You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything, yeah. It's only
I'm-
120. Yeah, you didn't do anything.
What happened? Hello?